que manda?
Dos buenos días a las personas que recién ingresan a este salón. Por favor, sentarse. Damos
Please take your
la
seat.
bienvenida a todos ya en un instante.
I would like to welcome everyone.
Estamos iniciando esta ceremonia.
In a few minutes, we will be starting.
Las personas que recién
with the
ingresan a
event.
estas instalaciones, favor
The
sentarse.
people who are
En
just
breve
entering
vamos a
the
comenzar con
room,
este acto.
please take your seats because we are about to start with this event.
traje el agua.
Ah, gracias. Gracias. Mucho gusto.
Dos. Una prueba para el número 2. Sí, 2. 1, 2, 2, 3. Ahí estamos. Vamos a pedir a todos sentarse. A partir de este instante les sugerimos dejar sus celulares en tono silencioso. Por favor, pueden sentarse. Vamos a comenzar. Por favor, pueden sentarse, vamos a comenzar. Si son tan amables, pueden sentarse, vamos a comenzar.
Please take your seats. We are going to start.
Buenos días, distinguida concurrencia, señoras y señores, se ponen de pie. Vamos a presenciar el ingreso a estas instalaciones del presidente de la República, profesor Salvador Sánchez Sereno. Señoras y señores, con la presencia del presidente de la República, profesor Salvador Sánchez Serén, de las distinguidas personalidades que nos acompañan en la mesa de honor,
and the special personalities at the honor table, we're going to start the event of the Human Development Report, Sustaining Human Progress, Reducing Vulnerabilities, and Building Resilience.
Pueden sentarse.
You may take your seats.
Escucharemos a
We will
continuación
now hear the
las
remarks
palabras del señor Roberto
of Mr. Robert Valent, the resident coordinator of the United Nations system and the resident representative of the United Nations Program for Development, UNDP in El Salvador.
Excelentísimo señor
Your
presidente
Excellency,
de la
the
República de El
President
Salvador,
of the Republic of El Salvador,
profesor Salvador Sánchez Serén,
Professor Salvador Sanchez Serén,
estimada señora Jessica
my
Fayette,
dear Jessica Fayette,
subsecretaria general de las Naciones Unidas,
who is
presidente del Grupo de Desarrollo
the
de las
Assistant
Naciones
Secretary
Unidas y
General
directora
and
del
Director
Programa de
of the
Naciones
Regional
Unidas para el
Bureau for
Desarrollo
Latin
para
America
América Latina y el
and the Caribbean of the United Nations Development Program,
señoras diputadas y señores diputados,
Congresswomen, Congressmen of the Honorable Legislative Assembly and the Central American Parliament,
señoras magistradas y señores magistrados de la Honorable Corte Suprema de Justicia,
Justices of the Honorable Justice
señoras
Court,
alcaldesas y señores alcaldes y sus honorables consejos
the mayors
municipales,
and the municipalities,
señoras y señores,
ladies and gentlemen, members of the government cabinet, and other departments of the government distinguished members of the diplomatic corps, international cooperation credited in El Salvador, dear representatives of political parties, business sector, and social organizations,
miembros de los consejos asesores,
dear members of the advisory committees on the Human Development Report, my dear colleagues of the United Nations system in El Salvador, dear friends of the different press media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to one and all.
Me siento sumamente honrado
I am deeply honored that El Salvador has been chosen as the host for the presentation of Latin America and the Caribbean on the Human Development Report 2014 called Sustaining Human Progress, Reducing Vulnerabilities and Building Resilience. On behalf of the United Nations Program for Development in El Salvador, I would like to thank especially His Excellency the President of the Republic, Professor Salvador Sánchez Serén, that today is honoring us with his attendance. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish to give a warm welcome
a la Subsecretaria General de las Naciones Unidas,
to the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, who is the Director of the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean for the UNDP,
la señora Jessica Fayetta,
Mrs. Jessica Fayetta, who besides being one of the leaders
más destacadas en nuestra organización,
who is of utmost importance in our organization, she is also a good friend of El Salvador, where she has contributed to the progress of human development in this country when she exercised a few years ago the position of the resident representative of the United Nations system and resident representative of the UNDP. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you for honoring with your attendance. Today, we have some other honored guests who are joining us to be able to carry out a conversation around the main contents of the report, and to be able to look for the proposals to make of Latin America and the Caribbean a much more resilient region. That is to say, that is going to be well prepared or better prepared to cope with crisis. I would like to welcome the distinguished panelists that without any doubt will enrich us with all the contributions. Mr. Kevin Casas, who is the Secretary for Political Affairs of the OAS, the representative of UN Women in El Salvador, Patricia Olamendi, and the Director and General Editor of Razón Pública from Colombia, Mr. Hernando Gómez. Buen día. Likewise, I wouldn't be left out without saying my special greetings to all of those who are participating of this great event. In this room, as well as the different countries of Latin America and the Caribbean that are looking at us through our live transmission. El Salvador is an example of human development achievements. In fact, it is one of the countries that has made more progress in human development for the past 20 years. This is a fact. Additional to that, El Salvador has been able to overcome a civil conflict, has been able to consolidate a democratic state, and the path that it has gone through to be able to achieve the development goal challenges. All of these are important challenges that the country had to endure with the support of the Partners for Development. It is a pleasure that El Salvador is receiving, on behalf of Latin America and the Caribbean, the Human Development Report 2014 that is ratifying what is already an important report for UNDP. People must be the center of all public policies, and the reduction of human vulnerabilities should be the approach of all of our efforts. Thank you very much. Welcome again to one and all.
Tenemos enseguida la
Now,
presentación del informe global
we
sobre
are
el
going
desarrollo
to
humano
see the
a cargo de la
presentation of the
Subsecretaría
Human
General de
Development
Naciones
Report
Unidas y Director
2014
para América
by
Latina y
the
el
Assistant
Caribe,
Secretary
señora
General
Jessica
and
Fayette.
Director of the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean for UNDP, Jessica Fayette. Good morning to one and all. His Excellency, the President of the Republic of El Salvador, Mr. Salvador Sánchez Serén, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I know that your agenda is tight. My dear colleague, who is the resident coordinator of the UN system and resident representative of UNDP in El Salvador, Mr. Robert Valent, the congressmen and women from the Legislative Assembly, Central American Parliament, justices of the Supreme Court, mayors and its municipal councils, members of the government cabinet and other representatives of the government, colleagues who are part of the diplomatic corps and cooperation organizations who are represented in El Salvador, representatives of the political parties, business associations, civil organizations who are gathered here today, my dear colleagues of the advisory teams of human development who have participated in putting together many of these reports in El Salvador, my dear colleagues from the United Nations system, particularly from UNDP, dear friends from El Salvador, it is for me a happy moment to be again in El Salvador, a country that has a special place in my heart, especially because it was my home for a few years back when I was here as a resident representative of UNDP and also coordinator of the UN system. Back then, I had the privilege of co-chairing with the President of the Republic, who at that moment was the Vice President of the Republic, and also the President for the Committee for Sustainable Development in 2010. This is a report that was also awarded at the international level with the Excellency Award last year by the Human Development Report Office from UNDP last year. We have picked El Salvador not only because it is a country that I so dearly hold close to my heart, but it was also an opportunity to come back. But we believe that the topic of this report is particularly relevant to countries such as El Salvador. Countries like this that have carried out a huge effort to be able to answer to growth and human development, and has had different achievements that they need to feel proud of, but they are still facing vulnerabilities, and these are countries that are vulnerable to economic shocks, natural disasters, insecurity among others, but also because in this country we have different notable people, like we said, the President of the Republic, Salvadoran citizens that are committed to human development approach with an individual-centered approach, and they share human development values. And it's also the opportunity to be able to say my special hellos to all the friends that I have in this beautiful country. The report that we are providing today to the Latin America and Caribbean report, together with Mr. Salvador Sanchez Seren, it is warning us that almost all the people from around the world have seen their human development increase. These progresses are much more slower due to the vulnerabilities that are affecting people and societies around the world. We are at risk not only of stopping this progress, but also to lose what we have accomplished with so great effort. From a comprehensive point of view, and therefore a new approach, the report is presenting that such vulnerabilities are due to the lack of strengths in health, security, individual income, as well as policies that need to be changed. In this sense, it is necessary to broaden and to adopt the livelihoods of people and to establish policies that are explicitly directed towards the reduction of vulnerabilities and to be able to promote resilience. Around the world, 1 billion people do not have enough livelihoods, access to health. 40% of them are lacking Social Security, and almost half of the workers around the world are employed in precarious jobs. In our Central American region, we know that we have made progress. During the past decade, medium income class and the situation of extreme poverty has been reduced. However, now 250 million Latin American men and women, that is 38% of the population of the region, have a level of income that it puts them in constant risk of going again into extreme poverty situations in case of an event of an adverse crisis. As it could be an economic crisis or an environmental disaster. Out of these, 98 million, almost half, have employment. But of these, around half are informal employees that do not have access to medical services, they don't have access to retirement funds, or they don't have an employment contract. The most harmful vulnerabilities and under which public policy need to focus first are the ones that are presented in the crucial times of the life cycle of people. Those are the first 1,000 days of boys and girls, or at the moment when adolescents go into their first job, or the stage of going into the third age. It is also important to look after the vulnerabilities that the report is naming as structural, those that are deeply enrooted into our societies and that keep in systematic disadvantage specific population groups, such as the case of women, our older persons, youth, Afro-descendants, and indigenous populations. We know very well that to trust excessively on economic growth, it is far from being enough to be able to revert these structural vulnerabilities. And it is clear that more of the same policies are not going to provide the same results as in the past. Now more than ever, the region needs to invest in universal social protection, particularly in the most critical phases of life of the Latin American, especially children, youth, and older persons. The report that we are presenting today to the region from El Salvador, it is encouraging us to look for a better balance between public interest and private interest. It is saying that we need much more than markets, and that a coordinated action between the countries and among the countries for the generation of universal public services is essential. If we do not strengthen the capacity to recover in the light of economic crisis and natural disasters, we won't be able to cope and to make progress on the economic development and environment. So the priority should be on the most vulnerable population sectors, and as a sine qua non on the fight to be able to reduce the persistent and important inequality that is affecting the Latin American and Caribbean region. So now, Mr. President, we leave in your hands, and through you, we provide this on the hands of all the leaders of the Latin American and Caribbean region, a report that is filled with examples that, contrary to common judgment, it is possible. Yes, it is possible for countries such as ours to be able to move quicker and better to human development that is sustainable and shared by everyone. And with this commitment, we assure the commitment to continue to support each and every country of the region in their hard daily work towards this one objective. And of course to El Salvador, that has made extraordinary efforts throughout the years to be able to enhance its human development, but it's still facing challenges and vulnerabilities that they must face. We hope that the recommendations of this report may be inspiring for the new government administration that is just starting, Mr. President, and for the citizens of El Salvador. Thank you very much.
Se procede en este instante a la entrega del documento, informe general sobre
Right
el
now,
desarrollo humano
the document is being handed over to the President of the Republic, Professor Salvador Sánchez Serén, by the Assistant Secretary General, Director of the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations Development Program. A round of applause. This is a report that has been handed over to the government of El Salvador. Next on, the remarks addressed by the President of the Republic, Professor Salvador Sánchez Serén.
Señoras y señores diputados de la Honorable Asamblea Legislativa,
Ladies and gentlemen, Congresspeople from the Legislative Assembly, Honorable Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean from the United Nations Development Program, Jessica Fayeta, Honorable Resident Representative for UNDP, Robert Belland, and other officials from UNDP who are today here. Mrs. Elizabeth Cortés de Madrid, the Ombudsman for Human Rights, members of the government, my dear and excellent ambassadors and diplomatic corps accredited to the country, honorable members of international organizations, special guests, friends of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Jessica. I apologize that I'm calling you Jessica because I consider you a great friend of the country. For El Salvador, it's a great honor to receive the Human Development Report 2014 and also to establish the path to be able to continue walking on this path. It is an honor, but it's also a huge commitment
y en el cual yo creo que
under which
El Salvador ha
I
dado
believe that El Salvador has provided an example of overcoming serious
pero la única
issues,
forma es
and the only way
hacerlos unidos,
is to do it together,
hacerlos de la mano para salir
to do
adelante.
it hand in hand, to be able to
Tiendo la
overcome.
mano a todos los sectores.
I extend my hand to all the sectors so that we can build this country, that we make it progress with the vision that we have been able to accomplish over the course of 20 years.
Quiero manifestar
I would like to
mi
express
reconocimiento
my acknowledgement
importante hecho que nos
to the
congrega
important
este día,
fact that is
la
gathering
presentación del
here
Informe de Desarrollo Humano
today,
2014,
the presentation of the Human Development Report 2014, Sustaining Human Progress, Reducing Vulnerabilities and Building Resilience by the United Nations Development Program. For the development countries, it has been important the contribution of all the human development reports that have contributed for the building of public policies that are going to enhance the livelihoods of our people. I would like to thank the United Nations program in El Salvador and the OAS for supporting us with technical support and proposals in the dialogue process and looking for agreements that through communications and the Ministry of the Interior, we are executing these agreements with the diverse sectors of the country. And they're helping us to put together an agenda and a structure that is going to look for a common objective. I'm glad to see that El Salvador has made so much progress over the course of the past 2 decades. This is thanks to the important achievements of our people and to the help of brothers and sisters, countries who are brothers or sisters. After the peace accords, the Salvadorans held to one each other, and we were able to reconcile and develop. However, the accumulation of vulnerabilities is reflecting the gaps that the neoliberal schematic provided. The imposition of an economic scheme provided recipes for a radical neoliberalism that never deepened into the enhancement of the livelihoods of the most poor population. But now we have a chance to be able to change and to provide a better approach on the multi-proposals carried out in 2013. The indicators are showing an improvement in the livelihoods of the Salvadoran population compared to the year 2012. Reviewing the evolution of the indicators, we can see an increase in the level of income at the national level, an increase of approximately $50, going from 506.91 to 556 with 16 cents. We have reduced the illiteracy rate from 12.4% in 2012. We went to 11.8% in 2013. This is thanks to the implementation of a method that has been customized to the country. I would like to support on the program is Yes I Can or Yo Si Puedo. If we talk about development, the greatest wealth of our country, it is its people. We believe that the enhancement of the quality of life of each citizen and the global progress of El Salvador to greater levels of development, it's going to depend upon the realization of policies that have an approach to leverage the potentialities of our people. We are convinced that public policies need to be focused to be able to build resilience on people and not only to alleviate the issues that they must face. One of the vulnerability factors that is a feature of the Latin American continent and is specific to El Salvador is inequality. our vision of well-being as a philosophical fundament on the government program that we're putting together is based on the principles of equality and inclusion. Beyond a theoretical conception, we understand equality as a necessary condition to be able to build a state based on diversity, freedom, and democracy. The actions that we carry out are looking for all Salvadorans, regardless of age, gender, community to which they belong to, their beliefs, and their social or economic condition, can coexist with rights and equal opportunities. The public policies that we are trying to promote from my government are focused on a perspective of citizen participation. All of us are going to participate on the strategic plans against poverty and exclusion. Over years in El Salvador, a mindset and practices have been enrooted that promoted individualism, racism, machismo, and hegemonic thinking, and this were creating the conditions for violence, leaving aside values such as understanding, solidarity, tolerance, and cooperation. Our society model corresponds to a culture model that is of different practices, that includes the individual but as well as the collective, promoting solidarity, cooperation, and mutual help. One of the great vulnerabilities that our country is facing is insecurity. The rate of homicides per 100,000 inhabitants is 41.2, according to the last measurement in 2012. That is why citizen security is one of the main priorities of our government. We have formulated the justice policy, public security, and coexistence. The key strategy is to have the national system for citizen security with 5 axes to work: the prevention of violence and crime, the prosecution of crime and violence, rehabilitation and reinsertion, the attention to victims and witnesses, and institutional building of public security. To face this vulnerability, we need the contribution of all Salvadorans. We have open spaces for participation with the management group, with the participation of different organizations from civil society. We are enhancing the capability of combat, ethics of the national police force to be able to tackle violence and crime. Community police is marking the start of a huge nation effort. They are carrying out actions to be able to tear apart organized crime, gangs, and any type of violence that is affecting the families. The challenge for the next 5 years is to be able to deepen on the topic of inclusion. Our decided support to the Secretary for Social Inclusion, and we have the Secretary, Dr. Wanda Pignato. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for your effort. It has the purpose to continue to formulate public policies with a human rights approach that are going to assure the respect of the excluded actors in El Salvador, such as women, older persons, persons with disabilities, and children in conditions of vulnerability. The innovative program Ciudad Mujer, it is projected to cover the complete country. Up to date, over 500,000 women have been serviced, a considerable number of women who are changing their conditions of life and of their families. We have started to develop our programmatic vision focused on the access to basic services as a fundamental human right. Like never before, El Salvador has assured its food sovereignty thanks to the reactivation of the agricultural sector. On the topic of health, we continue to deepen our greater health reform. We have set the foundations for a free health and equalitative system. Now we are going to look for its quality. The enhancement of the health network and the increase of coverage in 50% has had a result of increasing the number of Salvadorans who are now benefited. This objective of enhancing health has allowed us to be able to accomplish objective number 5, that is the reduction of mother death. We have been able to overcome any deficiency of gender, language, and economic level. We are looking for education that has social value, that is going to allow to fulfill equality with regards to rights, but also choices and opportunities and comprehensive development. In El Salvador, we have started to practice the vision of comprehensive development in balance with Mother Earth. And we are using science and technology for the service of people, because our great objective is that people are going to live well, that our children and youth can develop themselves in a safe and sound environment. Another purpose of our government is to increase economic growth through the creation of a productive, inclusive model. First of all, we are looking for economic stability that will allow us to deepen social policies. We have a main objective, that is to expand the possibilities for development, to reduce the levels of poverty and inequality. As a measure, we have already approved a fiscal reform that is going to allow to invest more in social development without increasing public debt. We are also supporting the entrepreneurs from the micro and small enterprises, and this for the integral development of the country. Based on the idea of a popular economy, we're also supporting entrepreneurial projects. For my government, it is fundamental to provide an incentive to national economy, the creativity of Salvadorans to be able to move ahead. This is a feature that it is key for us, because we are entrepreneurs. We're going to create the optimal conditions so that men and women can make the most of their capabilities and skills for trade. During the first 100 days of my government, we have launched a portal to be able to sell products to the government. And we have also launched the National Entrepreneurial Policy. We're also working on public investment. We are trying to expand the possibilities for foreign investment, to provide a stimulus for private investment in order to promote employment and the economic growth of our country. You know that I have appointed Mr. Oscar Ortiz, who is the Vice President of the Republic, as the appointee for the promotion and the development of public and private investment. He has been engaging in permanent dialogues with different productive sectors. And he has also met with different foreign business people who want to invest in the country. We know that the effort from this appointee are soon going to provide results. Another topic that we have been working on is the support to the agricultural sector in the country. It is key for the productive transformation that we need, and it's going to allow us to move ahead in food security and sovereignty. Immigration continues to drain our country from its main wealth, which is the hard-working and creative people. Almost 2 million Salvadorans live abroad. This is an undeniable reality, and enrooted in historic backgrounds due to different factors, but mainly because of inequality. The human drama that the children have had to go through when they go unaccompanied to the United States, because the majority of them are expected to be reunified with their parents, has provided us the debate, the human right to migrate, and to provide all the states of the world, to provide the conditions that will dignify immigrants with safety and security. But we need to provide the social and economic strength to avoid the drainage of population. We are focused on providing a closer relationship with all our compatriots that live abroad. During the past elections, we were able to have a voting abroad, and we are willing to continue on that effort. We are trying to not promote the non-safe immigration. Due to that, the immigration of boys and girls has been reduced in over 40%. As Salvadorans, men and women, we are excited to continue to progress on the path of changes. We continue to promote a new way of governance, being responsible, inclusive, participative, and transparent. Is going to be key to have the support through the Human Development Report 2014 in putting together and executing public policies that are going to revert the hindrances that we face. I would like to reiterate my gratitude to the program, to Jessica, to help to improve the quality of life of the Salvadoran families and from around the world. Thank you for providing us with knowledge and experiences. Now you are signaling deficiencies, and you are suggesting measures to be able to have a dignified life for one and all. I think that important accomplishments are waiting for all Salvadorans. I believe that a better world is possible. I think that we are reaching a consolidation of a society where each individual is capable of building their own path with freedom and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Ha sido el mensaje del presidente de la República, profesor Salvador
This has been the message of the President of the Republic, Salvador Sánchez Serén, who has received the Human Development Report 2014. Now we are going to greet him away. Can you please stand?
Pueden sentarse, por favor.
You may take your seats.
Muy buenos días a todos y todas.
Good morning to everyone.
Invito al señor William
Next
Pleites,
on, I would like to invite
representante
William
auxiliar y
Pleites,
economista jefe del PNUD en El Salvador,
who is
a realizar la presentación de los principales hallazgos del informe global sobre desarrollo humano
the
correspondiente al
Assistant
año
Resident
2014.
Representative and Chief Economist of UNDP El Salvador, who is about to present the findings of the Human Development Report 2014.
Vamos a esperar un momentito que
Very
venga
well.
represente la directora regional para América Latina.
We are going to wait for a while so that we can have the Latin American representative back in the room.
Bien, quizá para comenzar,
Well, to
este
start,
informe sobre desarrollo humano
this Human Development
mundial
Report
2014
2014,
es el informe número 14
It
desde
is,
que se produce después, el número, perdón, 24 desde que se produjo el primero en
24th report
1990.
since the one that was produced in 1990.
Fue un informe que fue
This was a
lanzado
report that
el mes
was
pasado en
launched
Tokio.
the past month in
Justamente, en vez de
Tokyo.
hacer un nuevo lanzamiento del informe,
And
vamos
instead
a
of
retomar
doing a new launch of the report, we are going to take on some of the elements of the initial presentation in the launch, but we have been able to enhance it with information from Latin America with the purpose to identify some elements to be able to build a development agenda for the Latin American and Caribbean region. Maybe the first is, what is the report? What is the Human Development Report? Well, the Human Development Report is an annual report that was created by the Pakistani economists Mahbub ul Haq and Amartya Sen. They were the co-authors of the first Human Development Report in 1990. All the reports are featured by presenting data, diagnostics, and of course proposals of public policies to be able to face the challenges for development that the humankind is facing. It is featured to have a holistic approach of development, and the main feature is that for the human development paradigm, economic growth is a means to be able to achieve development and not an objective in itself. It is important to have economic growth, but it's not enough. Another characteristic on the Human Development Report, that even though it is known as a UNDP report, it is an independent report that has been requested by UNDP to a panel of experts and advisors, and in that sense, it shouldn't be seen as a statement of the UNDP policy. Very well. Why the Human Development Report on vulnerabilities and resilience? To tell you the truth, the origin of this report, it is closely related to the Human Development Report 2013 that, among other things, highlighted that over 40 countries that gather over 50% of the world population had experienced a substantial progress in the Human Development Index from 1990 and on. On the other hand, on the consultations that have been carried out in several countries, the so-called post-2015 consultation, it is the concern of the survey population to provide sustainability on the progress that has achieved in human development. In other words, there is a perception that even though poverty is being reduced, even though several millions of people have been able to overcome poverty since the Millennium Development Goals were established, there is a risk, Jessica highlighted that many of the people that have accomplished to overcome poverty, they're in a situation of vulnerability and therefore they are at high risk of falling again into a poverty situation. And this basically, it is a concern because international statistics are providing the evidence that all the countries throughout all the regions of the world have been able to reduce the Human Development Index, particularly from 2008, where we had the global economic crisis. So if we are recording lower levels of economic growth, so the levels of vulnerability of falling again into poverty levels could be on the rise. Now the report is highlighting that even though the great progress that has been accomplished in human development and the reduction of poverty at the world level, there are a series of non-resolved issues. That is one of the main features of Human Development Report, is that it is quite broad in the presentation of information that will allow to identify the challenges that humankind faces. It says that around 12% of the world population is still struggling with chronic hunger. And in the case of Latin America, the ones under this situation reach 47 million people. The report says that at the developed countries, there is 1.2 billion people living with less than $1 or 25 cents a day, and another number that live with $2.50 per day. There is 1.5 billion of people that are at a multidimensional poverty situation. 200 million people are completely unemployed. 80% of the global population do not have integral social protection, and 50% do not have any type of protection. Another shocking data is that the 85 richest persons of the world have an equivalent wealth of that would cover 3.5 billion people. This is shocking. The report says that almost half of the employees around the world, that would be 1.5 billion, have informal or precarious employment. And the crisis of 2008 made 30 million people to lose their jobs. 230 million people, equivalent to 3.2% of the world population, live outside of their countries of origin, the majority of them in high vulnerability conditions. There's also approximately 700 million people who migrate inside their countries. Over 1 billion people live around the world presenting some form of disability. People who are 60 years or over present some type of disability as well. 19 out of the 35 million people who are suffering HIV do not know that they are HIV positive. The report is also saying that 800,000 women die every day due to the complications of birth. The boys and girls of low-income countries have 16 times greater chance of dying before 16 years of age compared to those who live in countries of high income.
millones de personas fueran
45 million
desplazadas
people
debido
were
a
displaced
situaciones de
due
conflictos
to
armados o a la
armed
persecución, y
conflict
que hay también
situations or
alrededor de 4.400
persecution, and there's
personas que
also
mueren diariamente a causa de
a large
actos
number of people
intencionales de
that
violencia. O sea,
die due
aquí
to
se resume, pues,
intentional
una
violence
enorme
situations.
cantidad de
So we are
vulnerabilidades.
summarizing
Pero también nos dice el
as
informe que
a
el
huge amount of
desarrollo se está
vulnerabilities, but the report is also saying
insostenible
that
ambientalmente
development
en 90
is becoming
países que
unsustainable
tienen
in
niveles
90
de
countries
emisión de
due
gases de
to the
efecto
environment
invernadero
because
que
they
afectan los
have
límites globales. También hay 200
greenhouse
millones de personas,
gases that are
la
affecting
mayoría viviendo pues en países en
the majority
desarrollo,
of
¿verdad?
countries
Que son
living in developed
golpeadas
countries
anualmente
that
por
are
desastres naturales. Y otro
affected
dato
by natural
importante
disaster,
que
and
también
another important
muestra
data
la
that is also
vulnerabilidad
showing
focalizada en
the
determinado
focalized
tipo de
vulnerability
grupos
in
es que
certain types
los
of
pueblos
groups is
indígenas
that
representan
indigenous population
aproximadamente el
represent
5%
approximately
de la población
5%
mundial,
of the
pero
world
aglutinan al
population,
15%
but they
de
gather
los pobres y al
15% of the poor
33%
and
de los pobres
33%
extremos
of the
rurales.
extreme rural
Un aporte importante de este informe mundial sobre
A
desarrollo
special
humano es que
contribution
también
on the Human
replantea
Development
algunos
Report
conceptos que
is that
utilizamos
also
cotidianamente. La vulnerabilidad, por
replanning
ejemplo,
some of
generalmente es
the
entendida
daily
como el
issues that we
riesgo de
understand.
sufrir un
Vulnerability is
efecto
understood
adverso.
as the
En el
risk of
informe se
suffering an
proporciona
adverse
un
effect.
nuevo concepto de
In a
vulnerabilidad
report, we are providing
al
a
que se le
new
denomina
concept on
vulnerabilidad
vulnerability,
humana, y
where
esta es
it is
entendida
called
como el
human
riesgo
vulnerability,
de que
and this
las
is understood
personas no
as the
desarrollen
risk
sus
that
capacidades
people do not
por
develop
carencias a
their
lo largo de su
capabilities
vida,
because
o
they've
sufran el
had a
deterioro de las
lack
mismas
throughout their
debido a
lives,
efectos
or
adversos.
that they're
O sea
going
que
to
la
suffer a
vulnerabilidad puede
deterioration
comenzar
of it
inclusive antes
due
del
to
nacimiento de las
adverse effects.
personas.
So the
Y por otro
vulnerabilities
lado,
could
el
be
informe
considered before
entiende la
one
resiliencia
person being
humana como
birthed.
la capacidad de las personas
And
de lidiar y de adaptarse
human
a las
resilience is
crisis.
the
Por
way on
supuesto,
how people can cope and adapt
definida de
to
esta
a crisis
manera,
situation. So if we define it in that
la
way,
vulnerabilidad humana, esto
human
exige también
vulnerability
una suerte de
is demanding
reinterpretación, ¿verdad?, del
a
concepto de
reinterpretation
desarrollo
on
humano.
the
El desarrollo humano es
human
entendido como el
development
proceso
concept.
de
Human
expansión de las
development
capacidades
is
de las
understood
personas
as the
que
expansion of the
aumentan sus
capabilities
opciones
of
y
the
sus
people
oportunidades.
to enhance
Pero con el
their
nuevo enfoque
choices
propuesto
and
en este
opportunities.
informe, el
But with the
desarrollo
new
humano
approach,
también
human
debe de
development must
preocuparse por la
also
protección y por el blindaje
look
de esas
after the
capacidades de las
protection
personas.
on the
Y esta
capabilities of
protección y
people.
blindaje
And
no se
this
da solamente a
protection
través
is
de la
not only going
prevención
to
de
be
efectos
through
adversos,
the
sino que
prevention of
o a
adverse
través de la
effects
creación de
or through
instituciones
the
que
creation
permitan
of
darle
institutions that
respuesta
will
a ese
allow
tipo
to
de eventos,
respond to this
sino
type of
también
events, but
corrigiendo las
also by
desigualdades,
correcting
las discriminaciones
inequalities,
y las injusticias que
discrimination,
experimentan
and
muchas personas
unjustice
relacionadas
situations
principalmente con la identidad,
that are
con las
related to
circunstancias en que viven y
identity,
crecen,
the
y con el
circumstances
entorno
under
en
which
el
they
que
are
viven las
living, and the
personas.
environment that surrounds
Básicamente este
people.
grafiquito presentado
Basically,
en
with
esta lámina
this
evidencia cómo es que se
drawing,
explica la
it is putting
vulnerabilidad de
into
las
evidence
personas,
how
y que
you
está
can explain the
relacionada, decíamos,
vulnerability
a la
of the
interacción de
population,
tres elementos:
and that is related
identidad,
to three
entorno
elements:
y
identity,
circunstancias. Y ahí pueden ver los
environment, and
diferentes
circumstances.
elementos que
And you
incluye
can
cada
see
una de
the
esas
different
categorías.
elements
En la
included
identidad,
in
el
those
origen étnico,
categories.
la edad,
Identity,
la
you have
identidad
the
sexual, el
ethnical
estado civil,
origin,
la ubicación en la
age,
estructura familiar,
sexual
etcétera.
identity,
En el entorno, por supuesto, patrones
status,
culturales,
and on the
exposición a
environment,
violencia,
cultural
vulnerabilidad
patterns,
macroeconómica,
exposure
nivel de
to
cohesión social,
violence,
y en el ámbito de las
and on
circunstancias también la
circumstances,
estructura
we have the
familiar,
family
el estado de
structure,
salud,
the
el
health
logro de rezago
status,
educativo de las personas, su nivel de
the
ingreso, o su
educational
estatus legal o
achievements,
migratorio.
their immigration status.
Y un planteamiento central que se hace en el
And
informe
a key
es
approach
que las
presented in the report
vulnerabilidades
is
se
that
acumulan a lo
vulnerabilities
largo del ciclo de vida
are
de las
accumulated
personas.
through the
Jessica
life cycle
señalaba
of the
que en el
people.
informe se hace énfasis que hay
Jessica
tres
was
momentos
saying that
críticos,
there are
¿verdad?
three
Donde
critical
precisamente pues,
stages
se
where
generan, llamémoslo así, esos mayores niveles de
these
vulnerabilidad
greater
de las
levels
personas.
of vulnerabilities are presented.
Prenatal y de la
One
primera
is the
infancia, y hablaba de
prenatal
los
and
primeros
first
3.000 días de
childhood,
las personas,
the
¿verdad?
first
En segundo lugar está
3,000
también en
days
esa
of an
etapa de la
individual.
transición
Secondly,
entre
we
la
have the
adolescencia y la
stage of
juventud a la
transition
edad adulta,
between
sobre todo, pues,
adolescent
en la
youth
etapa del
into
ingreso al mercado
adulthood,
laboral,
when
y la
they
tercera
have
que
to
se
go
da
into the labor
en
market,
el
and the
momento,
third
pues, de la
stage
salida de las personas del
when
mercado
people
laboral
retire
hacia la tercera edad.
into
Ahora, una de
becoming an
las
older
tesis
person.
centrales del informe con relación a
One of
América
the main
Latina
theses
es justamente
based
que
on
América
Latin
Latina
America
y el
is that
Caribe
Latin America
es la
and the
región en
Caribbean,
desarrollo que presenta
it
mayores
is
niveles de
the
desarrollo humano.
development region that is
¿Verdad? La
presenting
información
the best
disponible
or
nos
highest
muestra
levels of
que
human development.
en América
The available
Latina
information
hay
is showing
tres
that in
países,
Latin
¿verdad?, que
America
tienen
there are
un
3
nivel de
countries
desarrollo
that
humano
have
calificado
a
como
level
muy
of
alto,
human
es decir,
development that is
0.8
qualified
más, que hay
over
adicionalmente 21
0.8%.
países,
Additionally, there are 21 countries that are considered of high human development. They have an index of 0.7
de 0.8, ¿verdad? Hay
to less than
adicionalmente 7 países que
0.8.
serían de
Additionally, we
desarrollo
have
humano
7
medio,
countries
que es donde está El
of
Salvador,
medium
entre punto
human
55 y
development,
punto
where El
7,
Salvador is
y
located,
únicamente hay uno de
and there's
desarrollo
only
humano bajo,
one
que es el
of
caso
low
de Haití,
human development, and that
¿verdad?
is the
Y
case
en
of
general
Haiti.
los indicadores
Overall,
que
the
se utilizan para construir el
indicators
índice
that
de
are
desarrollo
used
humano en América
for the
Latina
Human
también se
Development Index
caracterizan
in
por
Latin
tener un
America
valor
is featured by
promedio
having
superior al promedio mundial.
higher
Ahora, el
average
informe no
than the
solamente
world average.
destaca
Now, the
que América
report,
Latina y el
it
Caribe
is
es la región
highlighting
en
that Latin
desarrollo
America and
humano
the Caribbean
con
is the
mayor
region
nivel de desarrollo
in
humano,
human development
pero sí
with
también
greater
destaca que,
level
sin
of human
embargo,
development,
es
but it's
también la
also
región
highlighting that
que
it's the
acumula
region that
más
accumulates
vulnerabilidad debido
the greater amount of vulnerabilities due to the fact to 7 aspects, among others. These are inequality, the fact that many individuals who have been able to overcome poverty, they have not been able to make it to the medium tranche, the precarity, immigration, violence, and natural disasters. Of course, that there are additional elements, such as macroeconomic issues that could exist at a given country. When we talk about inequality, we know that Latin America has been featured over the past decades as the most unequal region around the world. And this is a feature that continues to represent Latin America, even though we've made progress over the course of past years. But we continue to be the region with the greater level of inequality. And even though many people have been able to overcome poverty, they have not been able to make it into the medium class, and they continue to be vulnerable due to that fact. The reduction of poverty in Latin America certainly has been able to increase the percentage that corresponds to the medium class. The percentage of the medium class in 2000 was approximately 22%, and it was increased to 34% in 2012. But the group of the vulnerable went from 34% to 38%. So, to put it in another word, it is important to take into consideration when we talk about the classes based on their income. There's not only a class of the wealthy and poor, there's a fourth class that in this study we are calling it the class of the vulnerables. Another element that affects the conditions of vulnerability in Latin America is the persistence of gender gaps. We calculate the Human Development Index for men as well as for women, and in the case of Latin America, so for you to have an idea, in average, the Human Development Index would be the equivalent to the Human Development Index of Brazil, while women are comparable to the Human Development Index of Jamaica. There are important gaps in terms of political participation of women. There are countries that have made progress in allowing a greater participation of women at senior political level, but as you may see,
las tasas de participación de las mujeres
the
en
huge
cargos de dirección
majority,
sigue siendo muy bajo.
the representation of women at senior official level continues to be low. Another indicator that is showing the lack of gender equality is related that 20%, the women that belong to the 20% of the poorest population of the Latin America and the Caribbean region have 4 times
las
a
que
greater
pertenecen
chance
al 20%
of
más rico.
having a premature pregnancy than those
Un cuarto
who belong to a
elemento
different class.
que
A fourth
alimenta la
element that
vulnerabilidad
feeds
en
up
América Latina
vulnerability in
es
Latin America
lo que ya se
is
señalaba
what was already
de
signaled
parte de nuestra subsecretaria general,
by
es que
the
los niveles de
Assistant General
protección
Secretary
social
is that
en
the
el caso
levels
de
of
América
social
Latina y el
protection
Caribe
in the
están
case of
muy
Latin
por
America and the
debajo de
Caribbean
los niveles
are
de ingreso
very
registrados.
low
O sea que en otras palabras, con los
compared
niveles de
to the
ingreso
levels
con que cuenta
of
América
economic
Latina,
income.
deberíamos de
So
tener unos
according to the
sistemas,
levels
unas
of
redes
income
de seguridad
shown
social
in
con
Latin
niveles
America, we should
de
have
cobertura
levels of
sustancialmente mayores.
social
Y
protection
aquí
that could
un
be
estudio, pues, hecho específicamente para
better,
América
but this
Latina
is a
proporciona
study
una
that was carried out in
información
Latin
abundante en la
America
cual
is
no me voy a detener
presenting
mucho.
broad
Son
information where I won't give you the
aproximadamente
details.
5 gráficos. El
It's
primero es el
about
porcentaje
5
de
drawings that we
trabajadores en
have.
informalidad.
Is the percentage
En
of
2012 que
workers that
supera
are in the
como
informal
promedio
sector in
general
2012.
más del 50%,
And we are
aunque con altos
surpassing
niveles
the
de
average with
heterogeneidad entre los
50%.
diversos países, en este caso solo
And
considerados los de América Latina.
we have only
También, por
considered
ejemplo,
the countries
es de más
of
del
Latin America.
50% el
It is
porcentaje
beyond 50% as a percentage
trabajadores que no
of
tienen que no tenían
workers
un contrato,
that
¿verdad?
did
En
not
el año
have an
2012.
employment contract in 2012.
El porcentaje también de trabajadores que no tenían
The
pensión en el año
percentage
2012
of
varía,
workers
pues,
that
entre
did not have a
Uruguay,
pension
donde,
in
el
2012
número
goes
era
from
limitado a
Uruguay,
solamente
where
el
the number
12%
was
del
limited to
total de
only
personas
12%
trabajadoras, y
of
en
the
el otro extremo,
complete
pues, estaba
population of
Honduras, donde
employees.
prácticamente
And
los
then on the other
niveles
extreme, we had
de,
Honduras,
trabajadores sin
where the
pensión
levels
superaban
of
el 95%
workers without
del
pension were over 55% of the total.
Otro indicador importante
Another
es el
important
porcentaje de
indicator
trabajadores
is
sin
the
atención
percentage
médica por
of
parte del
workers
trabajo.
without
¿Verdad?
medical
Que de nuevo,
services
como
from the
pueden ver
employee,
ustedes, hay variaciones sustanciales, ¿verdad? En
from the
algunos países
employer.
del
So
Cono
there are
Sur, por
different
debajo del
variations
20%, y sobre
from
todo,
the
pues, en
south
países
below
de,
20% and in
Centroamérica,
countries
¿verdad? Y algunos
from the
países
Central
del
American
Caribe,
region. We don't have the Caribbean information, but we would be discussing that 2/3 do not have this type of benefit.
Sin embargo, de preocupación común,
Something that is of common concern for all the Latin American countries is the percentage of youth that do not work
pues, en la región estarían representados
or study. In the region, they would be representing 1 out of every 5 youth. And finally, the percentage of older persons that have some sort of pension. The countries of the south, they would be presenting levels that are over 80%, while the countries at the north, the levels of coverage are below 20%.
Una cuestión también que es importante
Another important issue that is worth highlighting is that the levels of social protection are
ingreso de las personas. En términos
inversely proportional to the levels of income. So what this drawing is saying that
dependientes,
the people
en este caso los cotizantes, ¿verdad? Trabajadores,
or the workers who provide
al 20% de trabajadores de más bajos ingresos,
money to their pensions are 20%. The ones that have higher income have 5 times a greater possibility of being protected than the 20% of the poorest of the employees.
quinto ámbito importante
A fifth important aspect to identify vulnerabilities in Central America, in Latin America, is related that Latin America and the Caribbean is a region with a high level of immigration or expulsion of people. 3% of, or 3.2% live outside their countries of origin. In the case of Latin America, this is equivalent to 35 million people who represent 6% of their population. In the case of Central America, the percentage of migrants overcomes 10% of their population, and in El Salvador is beyond 20%. On the other hand, with regards to family remittances in 2013, at the world level, $542 billion were received, and over $400 billion had the destination as the developed countries. And in the case of Latin America, over $61 billion reached their countries, and in the specific case of Latin America, $14 billion of the family remittances reached Central America. With the global crisis, the remittance flow has been affected, and in 2013, Latin America and the Caribbean had not reached the levels of remittances that they had reached before the world economic crisis. Of course, the issue of immigration and remittances needs to be seen with a broader approach. There's a diversity of social costs that are related to migration. The legal migration as well as the illegal migrants, they have a cost of being away from their families, the cost of adapting to their new place of destination, also the cost for those who remain in the country of origin. Additionally, there's an important phenomena to be able to understand the dynamic of insecurity, especially on the Northern Triangle countries, which is the case of the deported. They had criminal background and they are related to the expansion of the gang activity in Central America. But there's also a particular vulnerable group within the migrants, and those are the ones who are migrating illegally, especially during transit activity, with risk of going beyond the borders. The information gathered for Latin America and the Caribbean is highlighting something that the President of the Republic was also addressing: the high cost that our countries are going through due to the drain of people who are wise and to be able to provide their expertise. Almost all graduates are looking for better opportunities outside of their countries of origin. There are also estimates carried out by the World Bank that are saying that the cost of the loss in the GDP as a consequence of migration in some cases is a high level, such as the case of El Salvador, that they represent 7% of the GDP. But we were also discussing that the people who are in transit experience a various level of risk. This drawing is providing some information on what are the types of risks that they are exposed to in their path to their destination country, in this case, the United States. And we see how people are victims of accident. 10% of the people have reported to fall from the famous train of death. Victims of extortion, that is the 12% of the migrant population. Almost 20% are also the victims of burglary, and around 45% are victims of isolation, lack of food, or exhaustion. Also, what's been popular during this past day has been the issue of the migrant children. We would expect that really the flow of migrant children has increased over the past years. But the information what is telling us is that what has increased is the non-accompanied minors. The number of migrant children continues to follow the same dynamic of the illegal migrants. That tends to increase when there's an increase of the demand of employment at the United States, and it tends to be reduced when it's reduced at the United States level. You can see in this drawing that the total amount of children that were detained in 2005, when we started to feel the effects of the economic reduction, and then it was increased from 2008 and so on. The sixth topic for vulnerability in Latin America, and it was highlighted on the Latin American Human Development Report of last year. Latin America and the Caribbean is the most violent region of the world. And I would like to share some of the data that we had at that regional report. At the world level, the homicide rate is 6.9 per 100,000 inhabitants. And and it goes from 0% in the case of Monaco and per 92 per 100,000 inhabitants in Honduras. Latin America and the Caribbean, the average is 22.2, but there are 11 out of the 33 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean where the homicide rate surpasses 10 out of 100,000 inhabitants, and where homicide is considered a really serious hindrance. And in the Northern Triangle countries, we are facing one of the most violent microregions from the world. Finally, the seventh topic under which Latin America expresses high levels of vulnerability, it is related that this is a region that has high human cost and material cost in the effect of natural disaster. This is to say that in 1970, Latin America and the Caribbean were facing 10 natural disasters per year, and that frequency has been increased to 70 natural disasters per year, and that has cost between 1970 and 2010, according to estimates from ECLAC, has generated over 341,000 deaths, has affected over 62 million people, and it has also caused damages that are over $154 million accumulated in that period. Also, the information that we have available says that there are particular countries where the impact of the disaster, it is so strong that it's affecting the economic capability to face the damages, and due to that, every time that there's a serious disaster, there is a need to go into the international cooperation. Another important topic is to say that vulnerabilities are accumulated. These are some of the drawings that economists use that sometimes put more confusion than clarification, but this is saying that there is an inverse relationship between human development and employment, and poverty and informal employment, and there's a positive relationship between labor productivity and formal employment, and there's also a positive relationship between democracy and formal employment. So if a country is successful in generating formal jobs, the institutions, the democratic institutions, tend to be stronger. And finally, the report is trying to provide a light to the process of the formulation of public policies. And so therefore, we provide some principles that could contribute to the design of public policies in order to reduce vulnerabilities and to build resilience. And we highlight 5 recommendations. The first one is a recommendation for all the countries in terms to be able to design their public policies from a life cycle perspective. The report is saying that there are key stages where we can intervene in expanding the capabilities of the individuals. The first childhood, youth, and also retirement. Also, late intervention are not efficient, and they also increase cost. This is a very important drawing because in one way or another, with the blue line, you are looking at the process. For example, in this case, maybe you cannot read it very well, but the expansion of the size of the brain. And the orange line is showing the proportion of the budget that is allocated for the different age groups. So we are doing a reverse allocation explanation of what should have been done. When you have a greater impact on the investment, on the expansion of the capabilities of individuals, is in the first stages of the life of a person, like the Swedish people do. They are presenting the investment that they do until they are 16 years of age, and they show that the levels of expenditure per individual are substantially higher, especially in the first year of life of the individuals. The second recommendation of the report is to be able to have key services at the universal level for the process of expansion of capabilities. These are education, health, access to water, housing, and public security. And it's highlighting that this is possible even though that the countries are in the early stages of development. Because sometimes we say, this is an objective, this is a goal that we cannot set our mind because we have a per capita income that is too low. But when you see what the countries that have made progress on this matter do, I would say that the conclusion that we reach is that to be able to target universal services is much more of a political decision rather than an economic hindrance decision. We can see on this drawing that there were countries that targeted the universalization of social services, and there are countries that have recently targeted this to have social basic services as a universal approach, such as Ghana, Vietnam, and they have levels that are similar to El Salvador. The third recommendation is to promote full employment in a dignified way, acknowledging that they are key for the economic realization of a country. This is a key issue. When you examine the development plans throughout Latin America, I would say that there's fear in committing with goals and objectives related to decent forms of labor or formal labor. They would say that the objective is to increase employment? No. If we would like for the countries to progress on a sustainable and solid well-being path, we should have as a goal, as a long-term goal, to have a full employment. In the Human Development Report in 2010, we were saying that if a country wants to be a full employment country, they would need to be generating 106,000 jobs per year, so that is cumulative for 20 years. And the report is also saying that the countries that invest in the first stages of the life of an individual, they are the ones that are showing lower levels of unemployment. So we see the Nordic countries that even though they were affected by the global economic crisis of 2008, they are showing less than 6% of unemployment rate. Finally, two additional recommendations. The fourth one is to adopt a social inclusion approach to be able to close on the gaps. In other words, this is a topic that needs to be permanently monitored when you want to build on human development, when you are trying to exclude vulnerabilities, is to provide social inclusion, is to provide a privileged situation for those groups that have been historically discriminated against. And finally, the last recommendation is to strengthen social protection from a systemic approach to be able to create coverage in light of adversity. This is to incorporate risks in the design of public policies. If we know that we are countries that are exposed to risk, so practically we need to have inside of our public policies system, mechanisms or programs to be able to react when those adversities strike us. Thank you very much.
A continuación, me permito
Next on,
invitar a que pasen a ocupar su asiento las personas que han sido invitadas para
please, I would like to invite
un debate, una conversación sobre los principales hallazgos de este informe.
to take your seats to those who are going to participate in the conversation. Patricia Olamendi, who is the representative of UN Women in El Salvador. Hernando Gómez Buendía. And Kevin Casas Zamora, who is the Secretary of Political Affairs of the OAS. Well, thank you very much to the panelists that are joining us here. Just some previous remarks on the methodology of this panel is to be able to have a dialogue and to share on the perspectives of the report. I'm going to present to you some questions. I am going to present to you some questions to be able to direct the conversation, but you are allowed to go beyond my questions, and of course, if you would like to comment on what your colleagues are saying. So we have Patricia Olamendi, who is the resident representative of UN Women before El Salvador. They're facing some technical difficulties with the microphone. So I have Patricia Olamendi, who is the resident representative of UN Women in El Salvador. She worked with the United Nations on human rights, on the discrimination against women. She was the Secretary of Foreign Affairs for matters of human rights. She has participated on the drafting of law for the promotion of women and human rights in Mexico as well as Latin America. She has been an advisor to the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and she has helped in the protocol to tackle feminicide. She has a law doctorate from Mexico and 2 master's degrees in law. Patricia, thank you very much for joining us. Kevin Casas Zamora, he is currently the Secretary for Political Affairs from the OAS, as well as a non-resident senior fellow of the Latin American Initiative from the Brookings Institution. He functioned as a senior fellow on international policy of the Brookings Institution. He is the coordinator for the National Report in Costa Rica. He has a law degree from the Costa Rican University and also some master's degree from Essex and Oxford. He has written several documents on civil security. We have Hernando Gómez Buendía, who is a sociologist, economist, philosopher, and a lawyer. He has been a professor and a researcher of universities and think tanks in different countries. He has written and co-written 38 books and several academia articles, and including Colombia on Armed Conflict 2003, as well as matters of civil security, and he is the director and general editor of the current events magazine Razón Pública. So we are going to have valuable input on this report, and before we go into the matters of discussion, I would like for you to have a very brief reflection, maybe just a phrase, as though it is the headline of a newspaper on the Human Development Report 2014. It has been 24 years that this report has been issued. What would you say, Patricia, is the conclusion of this report and the Human Development Report? I think the main contribution that arises from the first Human Development Report is the vision of development. I think William was explaining it, but to put the emphasis on the individuals has not been easy, especially on economic development. Somebody would say, you're going to grow and then you'll see the benefits, and it was not individual-centered, but the people are the focus, and they are the ones who need to benefit from public policies. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you to UNDP. And even though many years have passed, I continue to feel UNDP as my home. I think there are several things that have happened. To be able to promote a comprehensive discussion on development is key, particularly in a region that for many years saw economic growth of every sign, color, and duration without this translating into greater levels of human development, and certainly not reducing poverty and inequality. So we need to broaden the vision of human development that is going to get out from the discussion of a merely economic aspect. I think that is key to Latin America. And secondly, I think that one of the key important aspects of the Human Development Report since 1990 is to say that the concepts are of importance. And in this case, the human development paradigm can be translated in concrete aspects to be able to enlighten different areas of public policies, be it immigration, citizen security, and in this case, vulnerability. To go from a theoretical discussion and go into the application in public policies, I think that is key importance. Mahumsak, that was a wise man, he said, human development is obvious. The object of everything that has to do with public policies is the people. That is where you are the most effective, when you put people in the center. The title would be, sorry, I cannot hear what he's saying. Being this report, the Human Development Report 2014, and some of the elements that we have of the complementary studies that UNDP is presenting throughout different decades, a region has been providing with different titles. We were peripheral to one center, we were a region in development, medium income, lost decade region, and now this report is providing us with a new concept, the paradox region. And this paradox is provided because over the course of the past decades, we have been successful in human development, we have been able to reduce poverty. However, we continue to be vulnerable with a very important factor, that is as though the medium class is an asset that needs to be leveraged through the region. So with this paradox, what have we failed on? I think what's new in Latin America over the past years has been the growth of the so-called middle class. Middle class that goes from $4 per day up to $1,500, depending on how you define middle class. So the good news of Latin America is that finally there was an economic growth and a social policy that allowed that the majority of the countries were able to grow on this group that are beyond poverty and going into the middle class. It is fundamental due to economic reasons, political reasons. The middle class is the one that educates their children, reduces poverty, saves, consumes, demands public policies. And from Aristotle, we know that the middle class is the basis of society. And so that is news for Latin America, because Latin America has grown. Since the 80s, we haven't grown like this. Inequality was reduced in a percentage, and in the majority, we have a macroeconomic balance. So what is the forest behind the trees? Is China. What is going around the world is China. The Chinese growth has been formidable, has increased prices, and Latin America grew with all the natural resources and the agricultural products. That is the secret of Latin America. The Chinese miracle achieved the following things. One, to pull up the economies. Two, to provide wealth to states. That wealth could have been spent in social policies. Third, China produces everything and they do it at a very low cost. So you have computers, cell phones, toys, bicycles, and that is the new middle class. This is very important to understand, because the question for the continuity of this, it is doubtful. This is going to work as long as China is working. If China is going to break under growth, then most likely Latin America is going to feel the effect. Yes, we've had growth in Latin America, especially growing with the participation of women in the labor market. This has allowed for the middle class to grow. So the million-dollar question is to be able to overcome part of poverty and the real middle class. So the question is that middle class growing fundamentally due to an economic model of exporting commodities, oil, mining products, agricultural products, and a social policy that is compensating, that is called the conditioned transferences, and they are possible because now the state has money from the Chinese grants. And this is to summarize it. If one is going to analyze it, unfortunately, the economic model is sustainable, nor the social policies model is sustainable. The economic model is not going to be sustainable because it depends on the international markets, and the social model is not sustainable because it depends on the fiscal transferences of the government. So the countries that have been able to grow is because they are inventing new products. The strength of the U.S. is that they create new products. For example, the computer, Bill Gates, that generates a huge amount of products, and growth is going to be placing the country on the borders of production, is what Japan is doing, is what China is doing, is what the Asian tigers have been doing, is what Latin America has not been able to do, unfortunately, because we react before the world, and we have been able to move into the profitable business, which is the business of development. So as a newspaper headline, that is why I can say. Now, Kevin, the question would be the same. Hernando is providing an element that in the previous presentation we didn't see. That is the capability of a region to be able to cope with threats or subcultures that have been imposed or suggested by external factors. So going along the line of the assessment of vulnerabilities, based on what Hernan was saying. First, a comment to the analysis that Hernando has provided that I think it is completely correct. I think besides of what could have happened with external entities, I think it is worth recognizing that Latin America has done some things very well over the past 2 or 3 decades. I think it is related to the Washington Consensus, and it was an incomplete prescription, but some of the things were very important, and Latin America has done them well. And I would like to mention one in particular that I think is key, and that is the control of inflation. The control of inflation is key for the well-being of the families, is key due to distribution issues, and is key, and you can lose sight of this very easily because the control of inflation favors political stability. There's a book that is waiting to be written somewhere, and maybe you know something about this in the South Cone, is the terrible consequences of hyperinflation. And that is one of the things that Latin America has done well. And now, with the Washington Consensus, we have added the notion that this dichotomy of economic growth and distribution is false. You don't have to choose. A redistributive process that denies the importance of economic growth simply is not sustainable. But on the other hand, an economic growth process that is going to deny that the investment in human capital, it is important, it is going to be doomed to die. The sources of economic growth are going to depend on the investment that is done with regards to human capital. Now, what are the issues that are still on the agenda that have to do with the vulnerabilities on the region? And I would like to mention 3, and some of those have already been mentioned here. First, whichever progress we have been able to accomplish in the region in different areas of public policies, we have not been able to progress on the precarious situation of labor. 50% of the population of Latin America works in the informal sector. So we have a very obvious source of vulnerability. Secondly, the very limited coverage of Social Security services. There's still something to be done there. Among all the different benefits that the robust Social Security services provide is that they reduce the volatility of the available income of the population, and that is key. And that makes it for the people to be willing to take risk if they are protected. And additionally, this is a key topic that terrifies me when we discuss Latin America, and we have interesting drawings. There are serious issues with education. Inequalities in access to education are persistent. We are not reducing them, especially in the quality of education. There are huge disparities, and they are condemning a complete generation to facing serious issues for their growth. So we have these points that are still pending. Latin America is facing serious issues in providing public assets in 3 key stages of the life cycle. It is not providing education and health in the first childhood. It's also facing serious issues in trying to integrate the youth population. 20% of young people are not studying nor working, and we also have a serious issue in providing a pension to older adults. So we have a point of view of a very complex work agenda that we need to address. Patricia, of course, you can provide your comments because you are the resident representative of UN Women here, and due to your expertise, can you discuss inequality and discrimination? What is the role that this plays as a condition for vulnerabilities in a region? First of all, I would like to say that I think that the report refers to vulnerability is of great importance because we had started to put together the report based on the response of basic needs of the population. I mean health, education, and I also am referring to better access to economic level. One of the key components of human development is access to rights. And vulnerability, in fact, does not allow for the exercise of the rights of people. It puts them in a state of incapability of transforming their lives. So I think the report puts the target on vulnerability, and that is very good. The report is addressing different vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities due to the social context in which we are living, the culture in which we are living, and women are part of that vulnerability. Discrimination against women has the root in a wrong vision of human beings. Religious visions, cultural customs that puts us in an unequal level. It doesn't matter how well educated or non-educated you are or the resources that you provide to the family. You are vulnerable because you're a woman. Another thing that I think is fundamental is to recognize other forms of vulnerability. And I would like to say that the report fell short, and I am sorry to say that the vulnerability that persons due to their sexual orientation was not addressed. I think this is one of the groups that is discriminated against in our society, but also those that justify the exercise of discrimination. I think our countries are far from guaranteeing the universality principle. There's no equality while people are recognizing their own differences. So it doesn't matter if you're a professional, it doesn't matter if you were born into a social context. What matters is that people are recognized. I cannot conceive any other vulnerable group than those who are part of the transgender or transsexual group. I think that the report should have deepened into this matter. The other is the vulnerability on the absence of the exercise of your democratic freedom. When the Civil and Political Pact was created in 1960s, the minorities were defined, and one of the features of the minorities was the complete absence of power. Vulnerability leaves people powerless, without power to change their lives, without power to influence their decisions, without power to be able to transform. So I think to reduce vulnerabilities is to provide individuals with tools so that they can have power. I've always said that women are the majority group that is a minority, because the absence of power from the side of women makes us that we are treated as a minority group. It is the same for groups according to their ethnicity, their age, their religion. So we should be capable to put it in black and white where those vulnerabilities are and who are the vulnerable subjects and why. Because otherwise we are not going to be able to build a transformation, and we are not going to create a real development. The economic, yes, is one part, but human beings do not live only from the economic. We also needed to provide and support other things, such as our liberties. So I think another part that the report touches upon, and it needs to be further discussed in how you're going to address these vulnerabilities, and is providing the affirmative actions and so forth. But I do believe that a country that wants to reduce vulnerabilities, the public policy should be filled with affirmative actions, because otherwise you're not going to be able to overcome a disadvantaged situation and to be able to improve their situation in the short term. The report is saying that there's no clarity on the progress of the measures. In many of the countries, in the case of women, the fact that a scholarship was provided so that girls have been able to finalize or to complete elementary and junior high education, I think the report is providing us with elements that we need to discuss as a government and as a country. More public policy, differentiated public policy, inclusive public policy, because without inclusion there is no social function, and if there's no social function we won't be able to identify ourselves in our country. Maybe looking into the future, and with a parenthesis that I would like to say, I live in a country where the psychoanalysis is incorporated in everyday life. So the collective unconscious from Argentina is saying that all of us are vulnerable, and that is not going to be able to be solved. But this report is talking about a human vulnerability that is further than what I'm discussing, and it also puts it in the light of public policies, and we need to become original that in accepting that we cannot continue to do more of the same. We need to break this vulnerability. Hernando, I do recall that in 2004 at UNDP we worked on the first report on democracy. The first question was, how much poverty can democracy can resist? And I would like to ask that question. And do you think our democracies are trained to be able to put into practice original, creative, efficient policies that are going to sustain the middle class, that are going to put a buffer on the vulnerability of the population? Well, it's very simple. The United States, that is the industrialized country that has a lower presence of the state, that happens in all developed countries. In Switzerland is Sweden, I'm sorry, is 50%. What I'm going to discuss are the taxes. If you want to have really protected and secure societies, first you have to go into the business that is profitable and not the one that is not profitable. To export oil produces money, but not enough money to be profitable, to produce labor. What did China do? They incorporated 550 million of people, 550 million inhabitants. They have incorporated over the past 15 years, and they are producing where there's employment and productivity. And Latin America has not done that, and that to build upon employment, and secondly, so that you have social protection, quality education, health, and the rate of taxes need to be duplicated in Latin America. This is an argument that Piketty has provided, and so I would just remain by saying what the press said, to look where the wealth is and to be able to set up the foundation for democracy. I think the greatest achievement of democracy was precisely to achieve the expansion of the state. Distribution is not to take away from the wealthy to give to the poor. It is for the state to create taxes which are not evil or good. They are necessary. The state collects the taxes, and with those taxes they're going to be able to have a good law enforcement agency, good judges, good pension for the children. But we cannot have that in societies, and I am sorry to again insist on that, to export oil and mining products since the colony. I'm not talking about the forest, but the trees, and with states that are not producing. For me, those are the key aspect, I would say. I say it bluntly because the effort that we're trying to carry out is to simplify the approach. A comment on this. The question that you present to us is key. I think that it allows to have an interesting reflection on what has been happening and is happening with the democracy in the region. I am under the impression, Pablo, and given the data that we have, that democracy in Latin America, with all the problems that we see in its operations in different degrees at different countries, democracy in Latin America has produced achievements. I am under the impression that what's happening is that the huge progress that the region was able to accomplish in terms of creating electoral democracies, democracies that were to allow new voices into the political debate, new groups in the political debate. This is a temporary lag, and this is being translated into better economic and social results, because the reduction of poverty in Latin America, the reduction of inequalities, it is not only the result of what the report is saying, or UNDP, to a favorable economic cycle. Is part of history, is the contribution of concrete public policies that have been made, concrete policies that have to do with transferences, with the increase of public investment that has gone from 12% in an average to 19% as a percentage of GDP currently. So I think that is the result of the incorporation of new groups into the political debate that are going to provide their contribution into the political scheme. There's this very good quote from Norberto. This is a paragraph from one of his books where he is explaining in very simple terms the emergence of the well-being state in Europe. And he was saying, when the ones who were voting were the owners, the only task of the state was to protect the right of ownership. But when the groups were expanding and when the voters were the workers, that gradually made the state to provide social security services, health services, to provide housing services, and to provide all of the things that we find in the welfare state. And that is a reference to the democratic state. And this has a very concrete implication in the case of Latin America from the political point of view. If we assert that democracy is capable of providing economic and social results with a temporary lag, I insist. If we admit on that, let's be careful that we are not going to present it with something that is not. Recent experience is showing that democracies that are showing complete separation of powers, where you have legal independence, democracy where you are not taken into jail because you're opposition, democracy where social demonstration is not criminalized, democracy where you can exercise the right of expressing, have been able to reduce inequality and poverty. It is the case of Brazil, Uruguay, Chile. Given all the issues of inequality, Chile over the past 25 years, year after year, they have been able to reduce 1% their poverty rate, and they haven't gone into measures of closing press outlets, of throwing into jail opposition. So you can see that human development is key. And you are talking about a welfare state, maybe as a condition to look after these vulnerabilities. Patricia, which are the obstacles that our region is facing so that welfare state and democracy can address the vulnerabilities? You have legal background, and I don't know if from the legal point of view you can have certain answers. What would be the obstacles and the solution to overcome those obstacles? Well, obviously, the aspiration in our region is to consolidate democracy. I am talking about a situation of inconclusive democracies because we have differentiated governance. There are people who can exercise their full rights because they have been born as a male and in a social class, or there are other citizens that are third or fourth class, depending on the race, origin of disability. I think the problem with our democracies in our countries is that need to be strengthened on the idea that is the equality of opportunities. If you don't build the path to be able to provide equal choices, then our democracies have failed. Something on the report I read, a new pact is required. Yes, a new social pact where all the excluded are included. I think that would be the most important part of democracy. But I ask myself, haven't we, throughout these past years, haven't we built a legal architecture at the international level that is going to set up the path for an inclusive democracy? We have human rights, and there's a deficit between our countries and the regulation that continue to keep past instances, and they haven't allowed for the exercise of human rights. Yes, we require reforms and quantitative changes, but the other problem of our democracies is that it's not guaranteeing democratic liberties. In our countries, we continue to live situations of exclusion and violence violence against the people due to their cultural or religious background. Freedom of speech continues to be a dream in some of the countries because people cannot express themselves freely or provide criticism when a policy is not working. We continue to have a number of public defenders who continue to be prosecuted. And women, they say, oh, no, 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 when you're quiet, you look better. I think that the freedom of speech for women is important. I think I'm much more attractive when I'm speaking than when I'm quiet, but it's not the reality of women, nor the reality of persons with disabilities or indigenous population. So I think liberties play a key role because that is the only way of building citizenship. And we don't have at our country level that citizenship. And the other issue with our countries is that there's a report on access to justice in a very weak rule of law. Access to justice allocates all of us who are not wealthy into a very vulnerable stage, because at the end of the day we do not know whether that justice is going to have an answer for my situation. I don't feel trustworthy. I feel completely vulnerable with regards to the justice system. The other is insecurity. I do believe that an important equation to strengthen social function is to reallocate the resources to public security that is into 8%, sometimes with regards to GDP. We need to revert it into social inclusion. We are in a society where women can exercise their rights, including the rights to decide, where openly people are going to be able to have no restrictions, and that is going to be especially necessary to be able to tackle insecurity. And I continue to insist, if we discuss democracy, citizenship, and the reduction of vulnerability, I would say that in the next report, maybe you need to go into greater detail on how we are exercising our liberties, our freedom, and how those liberties are being reflected, and how the state is building on the protection of those liberties. Because what we have right now are states that have dedicated themselves to tackling the exercise of the freedom of speech, and that is going to be of high cost for democracy and is putting a vulnerability on the citizens in light of exercising democratic liberties. On this, I tend to see the glass half full. I am biased towards being optimistic, especially what has to do with the development and the exercise of democracy in Latin America. I think it is important that we demand results from democracy, that we are very aware on the weaknesses of democracy. But I would be careful on those areas where the democracies of Latin America are not fulfilling our expectations. I am absolutely convinced that we are far behind from a full social inclusion perspective where everybody is going to exercise their rights fully. But I also have no question that what we have been able to make progress over the last generation in Latin America is considerable progress. If you're a woman in Latin America, in spite of all the things that you don't have, you exercise your rights with greater freedom. You have greater choices than a past generation. If you're an individual that nowadays are living in Latin America might have a greater access or exercise of rights than a previous generation. And this is providing me to go into a reflection that we lose sight of when we discuss these topics, and that these are gradual things. The United States took 200 years to be able to provide full exercise of the rights on the Afro-descendants, and it took Europe going from a noble parliament to a fully elected parliament. So I think the changes need to take a gradual approach. Hack, again, he was saying that the key question is compared against what? I would say that Latin America, compared to our past, there are some of the things that we have been able to have accomplished good progress. We have been growing faster than ever before since the 60s. Exceptional economic growth, macroeconomic stability that was able to provide us with a strength to face the global crisis of 2008, reduction of vulnerability, the surge of middle class, progress in democracy throughout Latin America, then again in the world, has happened because of the end of the Cold War. I would like to highlight, because we're talking about Latin America and the contribution or the effect of international factors, the development of democracy in Latin America has been highlighted due to the fact that the Cold War was over, and is variable in countries by gender, so it depends on what country and at what time you're discussing, and compared to our past, we have been able to progress. We are discussing vulnerabilities of the region. I would insist on the two great challenges that we have. We need to get into the serious cycle of economic growth. And economic growth is where technology is, added value products, competitiveness. That is how the North developed. That is how China and Japan developed, not exporting mining products or oil. That is not the way to develop a country, or otherwise you won't generate employment. And the other is that we need for democracy to grow, that the majority are going to provide greater public presence so that the state, which is the public asset, can accomplish justice and law enforcement functions and the new functions of what we have been discussing here: education, health, pension, etc. I think those two great challenges are still a pending agenda in Latin America, and again, compared to the past, we are better. Compared to our neighbor, we could be worst or best. Compared by gender, by ethnicity, by social background, we continue to see a largely unequal Latin America. But I think it is important to say what is the target of our challenges: greater amount of democracy, participation of the state, and to embed ourselves into the business of having true economic development. Obviously, I do not share the vision that we are as we are. Women only waited 2,000 years to be acknowledged as human beings, just this tiny lapse of time, but we continue to go step by step. Persons with sexual diversity is going to take about 3,000 years for them to have palpable evidence. I think that humankind has provided a regulatory framework. When we talk about universality, we need to acknowledge ourselves in equality in rights. It doesn't matter if you're a woman or you have disabilities. You're a human being. That is what is of great value. Violence against women in the region is just completely loud. the persons with disabilities are inside their houses or are the beneficiaries of a telethon. The indigenous are vulnerable because they're indigenous. The people who have dark skin are continue to be stored, and people due to their sexual preferences in the region are murdered and mistreated. These are realities. Human being needs to change because we have already changed. There's no democracy that can be called democracy if it's not going to guarantee a dignified respect of all the people that inhabit that country. I am one of the beneficiaries. I was born being a citizen in my country, not my mom. That doesn't mean that me or any other woman or indigenous in the region do not deserve changes right now. And you can accomplish that with clear reforms that are going to guarantee the rights of people and public policies that are going to guarantee that those people are going to have access to the benefits of democracy. So I think this report is going to provide us the cue to grow, to put it in black and white, to say to the countries, this is what's happening and this is what we want. We want to be equal in dignity and rights. From 1948 until now, we have not accomplished that in the region. And I think that is one of the greatest challenges. I would like to close this dialogue with one final question, very briefly. We are discussing the responses to vulnerabilities. Would you like to quote a global, national, or regional example to address vulnerabilities? Well, I can identify various. One was the Convention for the Persons with Disabilities, and that is allowing on public policies changes. In many of the countries, inclusion policies are starting to be drafted. The support for the girls to continue to be in school, I think this is a key action. As long as women do not go to school, and this is an issue of this country, they haven't guaranteed for girls to complete the elementary school. While girls continue to be victims of violence at their household, then we are going to be looking at a life with no future. If something is going to increase the human development, is for women to be able to have access to government. It is not that they are the senior officials at the government level, but at least you have some participation. We have women at the Congress level, so this is a fundamental change. I think these are very important actions, and the other are the label budgets. Budgets that are labeled for determined public policies actions that are being announced in our region as a way of correcting inequalities. I think this is of great progress too. At least in my country, Mexico, 20 years ago, they made the decision of promoting education for girls. And now you are looking at women who are participating in education more so often.
Ese es un ejemplo grande.
A huge example is the welfare state, and another huge example is China. In Latin America, I think there are some important examples. For example, the transfer program in Brazil, 35 million people. In Mexico, Solidarity. These are condition transfer programs. The Colombian Constitution, it was a great progress in recognizing all the minorities to discuss topics that Patricia is interested on. I think in Ecuador you have been able to see progress as well. So in Latin America, there are examples of different nature. In Chile, the Grow With You program, the individualized follow-up of each Chilean child, that could be done in Jamaica. So I think there are good experiences. That is possible. I insist. For me, what's fundamental is the forest And how are you going to reach a forest? By having citizen participation. Rights are not a gift, they are to be conquered. That is what democracy is about. In trying to eliminate vulnerabilities, we need to strengthen democracy and the state to be able to provide the security services. I insist the good practice of welfare state and China, I insist again, because they focus themselves on producing what is profitable. You have mentioned China so much, and I think it is interesting the economic growth of China, but there's a huge difference between India that is growing and is democratic and China that is not, because at the end of the day that absence of democracy is going to have a cost and is going to produce a huge vulnerability. Let's see. In terms of good practices, I share what they have said, and I would add another one, and I think is key if we are going to try to address some of the factors that produce vulnerability. It is fundamental to separate social security programs from labor policies, and this is connected, and this is creating inequality in providing certain basic services and is not covering a large proportion of the population. If we separate that and we decide to finance differently social system services, then we're going to get into the fiscal aspect of things. And I think that is the pending topic throughout Latin America. And I would like to provide one last comment. And I wouldn't like to be misinterpreted on everything that Patricia is saying. I am completely aware of everything that we are lacking on the fundamental rights of different groups throughout Latin America. But I would be careful in saying that a true democracy is not the one that is assuring right now full exercise of human rights. That discourse is going to become a continuous effort that we are looking at throughout Latin America to demonstrate the achievements of democracy, and that is going to have consequences. So I would be very careful with that. I would be careful in creating the impression of the real and imperfect democracies that we have right now are not real. And we see them in the results of human development and the reduction of poverty and the reduction of inequalities, and we see it in everything that is good that is happening in Latin America that we have been discussing today. And now, to close the conversation, if you were asked to pick on the headline of the next Human Development Report, I would say citizenship, democracy, and the reduction of vulnerabilities. I think that we need to work on citizenship as a key factor for human development. If we don't do it, then we're going to continue to fall short on human development. And I think democracies are not being undermined over here. I think Latin America made progress from a dictatorship into a democratic state. These are inconclusive democracies because these are democracies that have not been able to guarantee the exercise of rights for all its inhabitants. We need to build on democracy, but a democracy is not going to be built if you don't build on citizenship, if you don't empower the population, if people cannot exercise their freedom, if people cannot say what they think, if they don't have access to opportunities. So these are going to be inconclusive democracies because we were able to just recently overcome dictatorships. I think in the region, only about 2 or 3 countries were not living in a dictatorship, and the rest were in dictatorships that had conflicts. So we are recent democracies, and we have a we have conflictive issues in our countries and inequalities, but we don't have kingdoms, but we also have high wealthy caste, and they are the groups that continue to favor with democracy, and we have to say this openly. And if we have been able to overcome vulnerabilities, then allocate all the vulnerabilities in the right place, because that is going to contribute for the human development of people, and that is what we are looking for with the democratic efforts. What would be the headline for the next Human Development Report? I am not clear on the association of the Human Development Report approaches. I did have it when I worked at UNDP, but the topic of cities, I think that is key. If that hasn't been addressed, I think that is one of the great transformations that humanity is going through. For the first time in its majority, population of the world are at the urban level, and I think that it's a new transformation of humanity going into the urban areas, and that has allowed for great possibilities to provide public goods and services and access to rights in a much more efficient way compared to when the population was not at the city level. I think on human development, I think I would say it, the environment. Again, to look at the forest from 1950 up to this day, the population has doubled and production has grown. So we have put a great burden on the natural resources, and the international community continues to meet, but I think the environment has become the #1 priority, and I would continue to insist, even though there's a report on the environment, I would continue to say that needs to be addressed. It's a vulnerability that is going to affect us all, and it's a matter of life and death. Very well, so time's up. I thank you very much, Patricia Olamendi, and all the other participants, and thank you for being here.
Bueno, y invitamos a un refrigerio que está aquí afuera. Muchas gracias.
Steering